Okay, you're watching Live Now. I'm Austin Westfall. Another story that we've been tracking today. Federal authorities arresting and charging a woman with planning to carry out an ISIS-inspired attack on the New York State Capitol building in Albany. DOJ says 35-year-old Jessica Bowie of Albany, New York, made her initial appearance in federal court on charges of attempting to provide material support to a designated foreign terrorist organization, ISIS. Bowie had intended to target the New York State Capitol and New York State senators with an explosive device and then flee to Syria to join others in ISIS-controlled territories. She was apprehended by law enforcement as she gained possession of what she believed to be an explosive device. So that's what the FBI posted. Retired Marine intelligence officer, national security analyst, and the host of the Strap podcast, Hal Kempfer, is here with me. Hal, you and I have talked about terrorist plots a lot over the years. Is this a terrorist plot by definition?
As far as I can tell, Austin, looking at it, it has all the ingredients of terrorism. It's violent extremism. I would imagine that they will try and charge her with terrorism. I'm sure that's the attorney who's going to make that decision. But in a non-legal sense, if you will, in words of, basically in what she's being charged with, whether they charge her with terrorism or not, certainly by any common definition, what she was doing was terrorism. It was violent extremism. She had identified with ISIS. She had claimed fealty to ISIS online. And she had gone through all the things to do a plot, to do this homemade explosive plot against the New York State Capitol. So from what I can tell, it definitely looks like a terrorist plot. And ISIS certainly is a recognized international terrorist group. So although she is, from what I can tell so far, she does look like what we call a lone wolf, a homegrown extremist.
So this is 35-year-old Jessica Bowie on the screen, and these are some of the images that the federal authorities released of her. One of them, and I'll just say that these photos are a little strange. You'll see one where a phone is held up to her face there. I believe there may be a second one. Yeah, that's the second one where we see her with a shopping cart in a store. So, Hal, is it accurate to call this a lone wolf attack?
I think it is. From what I can tell, they haven't had any other connections with it. She may not thought of that. By the way, you see she's in a full burqa right there, which doesn't necessarily mean she's a terrorist by any means. But when you see somebody, there's a homegrown radicalization process where they pre-radicalize and then they start to self-identify with whatever movement there are. In this case, sort of the Salafist jihad movement, violent jihadist extremism. And one of the things you notice in this process is that there will be a sudden change. You saw in the previous picture, she's wearing typical American Western attire. And then all of a sudden you see them changing what they wear, who they talk with, everything about their lives. It's a sudden rapid change that really catches attention. And I'm just seeing this with the pictures here. It definitely looks like she fits that homegrown radicalization process. And then, of course, everything I've read about it saying, she definitely had self-indoctrinated online. And at some point, the FBI undercover, one or more operatives were able to pick up on this. And then that was part of the process of building the case and making sure they stopped it. But I definitely think she falls into that lone wolf category.
Are lone wolf attacks more common than larger operations?
They see, certainly in the U.S., they seem to be the norm. Lone wolves. At 9/11, that was a very involved conspiracy. You had everybody coming from overseas. They did flight training. They did all of these walkthroughs and stuff. They got through the airport security, did this very elaborate attack. And so for a while, we were looking for what was called sleeper cells, basically those who were over here planning to do some plot. And that was a big theme in the early to mid-O's. But what we started to see in New York, NYPD was actually the lead of this, was we started to see more of these homegrown plots. And they're the ones that actually developed initially that homegrown radicalization process I just talked about, where they basically track how they move through this process to the end point, which is where they actually conduct action. Obviously, in this situation, the FBI was on this. I don't know exactly at what point, but it sounds like they got in there soon enough. And they were able to prevent her from actually, deploying assets, deploying weapons or bombs. and able to make an arrest. And I think they'll be pretty successful. Although I'm pretty sure her attorneys will do what always happens in these cases. They will say that it was entrapment. That's pretty much a norm for defense attorneys of terrorists, especially lone wolf terrorists, that they'll make that argument.
How is it typically that Americans can pretty much? Why is it that ISIS propaganda resonates with a small portion of Americans? What's the common denominator among people who do fall in line with some of these thoughts?
Well, it's not just Americans. ISIS rhetoric has been resonating in a lot of places. You'll see it certainly in North Africa and the Sahel region. ISIS has put a really big footprint there. In fact, I think they're bigger in the Sahel than they certainly are in Syria or any of the Middle East for that regard, except maybe parts of Afghanistan. But in North America and in Europe, sometimes it's those who are just looking for something. They're searching for a cause. They're frustrated. We've seen certainly this is a case where she gravitated towards ISIS and radical jihadist sort of extremist beliefs. Extreme Salafism, but with other cases we've seen nihilism where they will just reject society outright. And I think certainly psychiatrists or psychologists will look at that and say it is that same sort of deeper psychological yearning to identify with something or to find some belief or find some cause, and whatever they go into, and we see this, whether it's anti-government extremists, neo-Nazis. In fact, we have seen some of the stuff with the neo-Nazi anti-government extremists doing the same sort of stuff. Not the same reasons, but the same sort of stuff that the Salafist jihadist terrorists are doing in terms of how they indoctrinate their people and do everything else.
So there's a difference between an ISIS-inspired plot and an ISIS plot. What's the level of, I suppose, threat for an ISIS plot, not an inspired plot?
Well, an ISIS plot would, which I'm not saying there's a corporate headquarters for ISIS somewhere overseas, but there are places where they are centered. They do have places where they do training. If you go back to Al-Qaeda, which was pre-ISIS, but ISIS actually came out of Al-Qaeda, they had these big training camps in Afghanistan. And so they went through formal training on everything you could think of: weapons, bombs, knife fighting, unarmed combat, all sorts of stuff, surveillance, counter-surveillance, all sorts of things. So what you would find with an ISIS plot is probably a higher level of sophistication. The thing with the lone wolves, in some cases there might be more than one person, like maybe two, not a lot, but it does sometimes happen, that they're basically training themselves. In fact, a lot of the training they're getting is online. So what you'll find is typically their tradecraft, how they do things, tends to be a little clunky. It tends to be more apparent. You can pick up on what they're doing because they're not sophisticated operatives. They haven't gone out there and gone through formal training on how to do surveillance, reconnaissance, or anything like that. So when you're looking for those suspicious activity, pre-incident indicators of possible action, the lone wolves tend to be a little bit easier to pick up on more often than not.
Hal Kempfer with us on this Thursday evening. Hal is the host of the Strat podcast. You can listen to Strat anywhere podcasts are available. Thanks, Hal.
All right. Thanks, Austin.
You bet.